Now then, hey guys, it's been a while. It's good to be back, and much like you guys, I'm excited for Borderlands 4. And whilst I haven't attended any of the events so far as a content creator because, well, I've not been here, I did notice some key tonal shifts from all of the stuff around Borderlands, developer interviews, tweets, behind the scenes talk generally from Gearbox about the new game. And there's this overarching big tonal shift, I think, that's happening with the game. And it's something that I've noticed that nobody's really shining a light on specifically, because it's mostly a small, subtle change, but honestly can have major impacts of how good Borderlands 4 can be, and I think it deserves way more attention. So let's talk about it. To really highlight the area that I wanted to focus on more, we have to look back at Borderlands 3. I'd say the main criticisms with Borderlands 3 can be summed up into 6 abrasive issues, and the word abrasive is going to crop up quite a lot with this. The first of which is the story, which I don't think we can talk about much. We don't know anything at all about the storyline from Borderlands 4. We have some hints and stuff, but we are assuming that they're going to learn the lessons of the Calypso twins and everything that went wrong in Borderlands 3, right? So we'll start with gameplay, and I think the overall, if you play through the campaign, the main issue with gameplay can be summed up in 3 words. Talk to Lilith. It didn't take long for this to become a community meme, and then one of the biggest focal problems that the game was suffering from. Having to go back to Lilith, fly from planet to planet with Sanctuary, and honestly just sort of take you out of that gameplay momentum. Especially when you get to, for example, at Promethea Athena level, where you're just back and forwards, it really starts to feel like a slog, and even with the Anniversary Edition allowing you to skip certain dialogue, as somebody that replayed through Borderlands 3 fairly recently, it still didn't feel great, to be honest. The reason why I wanted to start with this is that Moxie had an interview with the creative director of Borderlands 4, Graham Timmins, about this specific issue with Borderlands 3 and how they've improved upon it for BL4.
I wanted there to be as few interruptions as possible for me. Back in BL3, I counted all the level loads that you'd have on a mission. And we had only this many level loads per mission because that was annoying. Those are all interruptions. In this game, I really wanted to go out there are no reasons to put down the controller. And so we wanted the world to be seamless with no loading screens as much as possible. Missions being able to be picked up on the fly in some cases. Talking about your character, where you can still modify your character on the fly way more and just have less opportunities to be like, oh, I want to put the controller down. So that was really that's why I use the term seamless, because it speaks to more than just the world. It talks about just the player experience and not having those interruptions distract you.
The other side of gameplay, I would say, is movement. And I think that Borderlands 3 made a lot of really big and nice improvements for movement way back in 2019. Stuff like the crouch sliding, the handling of guns and stuff, it felt pretty good, and all of the different vehicle types that you could use. However, that was 6 years ago now, and movement in video games has improved a ton. But with additions like the Digi-Runner and also the grapple hook, you can clearly see that the developers are focusing on just making these areas of moving around just less of a slog, less abrasive, more seamless, like Graham Timmins was saying. Sure, there are certain sections of the game that feel a little bit too slow. For example, Killer 6, who's let me use some of the gameplay from his channel and his hands-on event, which shout out to him, he did highlight that respawning can take a hefty amount of time, and you would assume that the developers would be able to reduce that for a little bit more, because yeah, it does feel a while. But overall, even just from watching the stuff that we've seen briefly, it does feel a little bit more of a boots on the ground. You're involved in the action, and whilst you can change stuff around as you need to, you're not completely disconnecting from the game onto your own little island flying above the planet. The second area that I wanted to highlight is accessibility barriers, which is a little bit harder to explain. I don't mean like accessibility in a sense of colorblind modes or controllers to allow people with physical disabilities to play the game. Whilst that's important, that's not what I mean here. What I'm talking about specifically is accessibility gaps in the game through gameplay literacy. Almost just knowledge checks, stuff that isn't inherently obvious for people to use. Here's an example. So I was watching Jolt's dude play through Borderlands 3 recently because I've been doing the same thing myself. I wanted to see how somebody that has been involved in that game for the last 6 years just moves around the map, what he does that I don't, right? And I noticed him do this jump skip to get from the top of Sanctuary to the bottom to get into the world faster. Now, there's going to be people that are watching this go, Ryan, how do you not know that? How have you never seen that before? I do it all the time. But I want you to think about all of the players that have put an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours into Borderlands 3. How many percentage of people do you think know about this jump skip? Or have even done it themselves? Probably not that many in the grand scheme of things, right? But that's a very niche example. What if I take something like save quitting? After you kill a boss, you save quit, you can run the boss again, farm them for specific bits of loot. It's a mechanic that has been in Borderlands games pretty much since its inception. How many people, percentage-wise, do you think know about this mechanic or have done it themselves? I would argue less than half. I would argue a lot less. But I'm curious about what you guys think, because genuinely I don't know. But it's been on my mind a lot. It's not that this mechanic is bad and that it's been gatekept. It's like Jolt's dude in Killer 6 be like, "Mwahaha, you can't use this." Of course, people can just find out, do it themselves. But the game doesn't tell you about this stuff. Borderlands has always suffered from having too many unspoken mechanics that new players are just never told about, unless they watch a YouTuber or a guide on how to get the most out of the game. And especially with everything that I just mentioned about how sloggy Borderlands 3 can feel when just playing through it normally, how frustrating it must be for a player to go through that slog and then watch a video about how to skip the majority of those interactions, right? Playing any looter game, and certainly looter shooters, it's all about feeling efficient and feeling unstoppable. So when your efficiency mechanics in the game are almost hidden or are just not obvious, people are going to leave frustrated that you needed external knowledge to just access some of the fun parts of the game. So when you see stuff like the Moxie Encore machine, I was really happy to see it. It's such a small change, but it puts that almost iconic aspect of Borderlands being able to save, quit, and rerun a boss front and center for new players to look at, instantly understand what it's meant to be, and use the mechanic themselves without having to go and look at something that isn't in the game. It's not like we've ever had a tutorial about save quitting, right? And I'm not saying that there shouldn't be these like knowledge checks in a game. Like, I've come from coaching a lot in Deadlock at the moment, Valve's new shooter, and there's a lot of knowledge to obtain with that game. It is crazy. People are going to lose their minds when they actually get their hands on it. However, actually playing a game of Deadlock is pretty intuitive. You pick up a lot of it naturally, and it's very pick up and play.
Слушай, ты вообще в доту, ну, вот эту хуйню играешь долго?
Language, fuckhead. Нет, 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 нет.
Happy birthday to you! Happy birthday to you!
And that's what the best games are. Easy to learn, hard to master. And a lot of the cool mechanics of Borderlands 3 are easy mechanics to learn, but you don't get taught them. So stuff like this that we're seeing with the Encore machine, for me, is a big move in the right direction, and I hope there's more of that to come. Now we move on to loot, and the reason why I wanted to talk about the accessibility barriers thing first is because it does have an impact on loot endgame and Vault Hunter skill balance, as we're seeing. I think the most notable criticism of the loot, the billions of guns that were available in Borderlands 3, is it really just came down to a few that were worth having, and certainly towards the legendary weapons. Even through playing the game recently, I was trying out a lot of different guns. It was fun. I got a Hellwalker. It was super strong. I've had it for the last 5 to 10 levels because nothing else comes close to how impactful it is. But much like I said about accessibility barriers, a lot of new audience people for Borderlands 3 aren't going to know how like god rolls work and the difference between legendaries and epics when it comes to like looking for the best weapon stats on them. And these are systems that we've seen the likes of Diablo and Path of Exile start to lean into a little bit more, being able to press a button to see where your roll lands and how to basically optimize for it in the future. It's like I said before, going out of the game to learn about these systems instead of the game helping you with them yourself. But we've already heard and seen the Gearbox developers talking about the reduction of legendaries that we're about to see, and also the new impact of epics, that they're going to feel a lot stronger. And with all of the weapon slot systems that they've added in to give each gun a lot more diversity in what it could do, making sure that epics can also feel strong, and that you actually want to be looking for perhaps god roll purples as opposed to the legendaries themselves. And this tweet sums it up, wanting legendaries to feel special, but you also want purples to not be made useless at endgame because of how good legendaries are. Graham Timmims again just sort of chimes in saying that epics are not going to be better than legendary gear, but just that the right combination of parts for your character could have them complete or exceed some legendary gear that don't match your build. And that no matter what, these legendary guns are going to be worth hunting and farming. And with all of the combinations that we've seen for what you can have, and certainly with the new ordnance system, stuff like shield and armor finally being added to the game for us, It gives players more agency over their builds and what they're doing, but we'll touch on that a little bit more in a second. The penultimate point is endgame, and I think that this was always going to be a weird area for Borderlands 3 if we're looking at it from that perspective. This isn't a game as a service, we're not seeing the Destiny element of raids added into the game when BL3 came out. It did just sort of feel like the activities that were at endgame were either lacking or just too frustrating. I love doing Proving Grounds. I even won a tournament for Twitch Rivals, being able to be one of the fastest alongside Lazy Data and stuff, etc. But outside of that, they didn't really offer much replay value. They were a little bit bland in some areas. Circle of Slaughter was fun, but I maybe did it like a handful of times because it lacked any meaningful progression, full stop. And then you've obviously got the DLCs, but I imagine most people played through the campaign, maybe did true Vault Hunter mode a little bit, and then just waited for the DLCs, if that. But then you've got stuff like Mayhem mode, which felt very bullet spongy when you first tried it, and going back to the whole accessibility barrier, if you didn't know how to make the most out of your build, it really felt that you couldn't go much further than Mayhem 1 at most, and you weren't being efficient. And then you just had really anti-fun modifiers on Mayhem modes on top of that, as well as just ruining the builds that you want to run yourself. So it either required these knowledge checks to get the most out of the system, or they felt very grindy and just horrible. And the actual modes to play themselves didn't give you much agency. But in that same interview from Moxie with Graham Timmins, he does confirm that Mayhem modes are not making a return for BL4.
We do have plans for an endgame. Mayhem as a concept does not exist in Borderlands 4 in any shape. And we have built, through the action skills and our damage pipeline, we're thinking ahead for how endgame scaling can work, and where all types of builds are viable without needing to do any special correction behind the scenes. So we should be safe there.
And for endgame, that's really all that we can say on that front, I think. Much like story, Gearbox don't want to give too much away, especially when you have stuff like Gamescom around the corner. And finally, the skills and balance of the Vault Hunters. The majority of the content that I made after the launch of Borderlands was patch notes, because that was the main focus of balancing out certain characters. As somebody that was a day one Zane main, I didn't have the best of time playing the character. In fact, I made a lot of criticisms on how weak he was in endgame, and it did take a while for him to be buffed in the right areas, but it's just the typical thing of waiting for balance changes that makes playing some of the characters feel rough. Now, I do think there is an element of like people loving to go for what's meta, what's efficient and stuff like that, and that people should play what they want. But like I said with Endgame, if you have some characters that are just bottlenecked that can't get further into the game because Mayhem modes are too hard, or their build doesn't synergize, or some guns are way too powerful but they don't work with what you're running, you're just stopping people playing what they want, and that's never a good feeling. Yet again, we're seeing a lot from the devs talk about making sure that characters feel strong and that they don't require many balance changes after the launch of the game. And of course, with the skill trees having a lot more options, as you're seeing with the graphic on screen, it really does feel like you have a lot more just control over how you want to run your character, and the game is giving you more options to synergize with, and not having to go back to a new use station to reset your talent tree and costing you a bajillion credits or whatever it is to do it. Because again, that doesn't feel great. But before I finish, naturally it feels that there are a lot of good evolutions in the right direction for Borderlands 4, but on that subject of the Vault Hunters and the skill and balance, I actually want to go back to an interview from 2019 with Chris Brock, who was one of the main producers behind Borderlands 3, a fantastic person to talk to. Honestly, every opportunity I had to chat with him, he was absolutely lovely, and he gave me so much time and so much new information to share with you guys. He's still at Gearbox, which is great. But this is what he said about Borderlands 3 back in 2019, and it still rings true for Borderlands 4 going into 2025.
So, like, there are things that we look around like, okay, well, this is what we are, that's what they are. It's not a zero-sum game. Like, you can like both games, right? Like, so we don't want to just conform to that. We want to be what Borderlands is. Yeah, so split screen's a big deal to us, right? You know, 4-player co-op's a big deal to us. 4 distinct Vault Hunters is a big deal to us, right? Like, there are things that about the franchise that are like kind of part of its DNA, and you don't want to get away from that. But at the same time, we would be insane to not look around and be like, okay, well, times are different, expectations are different, and we need to accommodate that.
And yet again, we have had developers say that there's always going to be the characters of the Vault Hunters, that they're not just going to be a faceless hero like in World of Warcraft traveling around the world doing all of these missions. You are playing a character, and those characters can resurface in future iterations of the game, like we're seeing with Zane, who I really, really hope doesn't die. Please, God, don't kill him off just yet. But I hope now that you see my point, and whilst I was a little bit uncertain about what Borderlands 4 might look like in the future, the game industry has changed a lot, and looter shooters and just general other like ARPG games like Path of Exile 2 and Diablo 4 have had a lot of issues over the last couple of years. It's a genre of game that comes with so many difficult areas to deal with. It's been a while since we've seen one really succeed, I think. But with everything that I've highlighted in this video, I'm quietly hopeful that Borderlands 4 might be able to bring a lot into the future. And if I didn't think that, well, I wouldn't be making these videos. But thanks for watching. If there are people that are genuinely curious on where the hell I've been over the last 6 years, I can answer that in a future video, but I'll leave it there for now. I'm a little bit out of practice in making these videos, but it was a lot of fun. I hope you enjoyed listening, and I'll see you in the next one.